Morning to you. Boris Johnson will today urge leaders of the world's biggest economies to make good on their commitments to cut carbon emissions ahead of a crucial climate talk in Glasgow. As he flew into the G20 summit in Rome, the Prime Minister said Team Humanity is 5-1 down at half-time in the fight against climate change and must act now before it's too late. President Biden is also in Rome but is struggling to get support in Congress to make good on his climate commitments. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports from Rome.
Joe Biden comes here without a deal sealed with Congress, backing his climate change programme, and to a G20 that's divided on the issue. This is what's at stake, though. Extraordinary floods in Sicily, a timely reminder of the urgency of the moment, in scenes straight out of a disaster movie this week. In balmy sunshine, world leaders arrived in Rome for the G20 summit and to a stern lecture from the UN Secretary General about their failure so far.
Even if recent pledges were clear and credible, and there are serious questions about some of them, we are still careening towards climate catastrophe. Under the best-case scenario, temperatures will still rise well above 2 degrees, and that is a disaster.
On his flight here, Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued twin warnings on climate change and COVID-19, calling on G20 partners to vaccinate the world by the end of next year. But ahead of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, international efforts are losing momentum, not least because America's president is struggling to deliver on his agenda.
Joe Biden comes here still needing to convince allies that America really is back and leading the free world again, not least on climate change. The G20 has to prove it is united enough to tackle the climate crisis.
I'm the only Irishman you've ever met who's never had a drink.
Joe Biden shared a present and jokes with the Pope, but comes here without a deal sealed at home on his climate change programme. Doubts over COP and the G20 are helping fuel protests ahead of the summits. Greta Thunberg joining activists in London. And in Rome, thousands are preparing to march on the G20 summit. Among those gathering at this climate camp, there seemed a growing sense of despair.
You have to act now and you have to change the economic system.
Otherwise,
it's going to be a disaster.
They're really not doing anything. It's getting worse by the minute. And literally, we have very few years to come to stop this. We have to stop it right now. Tomorrow is already late. Every day is late. And they really have been doing nothing.
From Rome to Glasgow, your solutions are the problem, says this banner. World leaders have 2 days here and 2 weeks in Scotland to prove that wrong. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Rome.
In just a few minutes, I'm going to be talking to the Green MSP Ross Greer in Glasgow about his hopes for the climate conference. Now, the Queen has been advised by doctors to rest for more than 2 weeks. Her Majesty will not undertake any official visits during this time, but the palace says it's her firm intention to attend the annual wreath-laying ceremony at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, reports.
Remembrance Weekend is one of the most significant moments of the year for the royal family, a time when they all gather together. But we now know the Queen is going to miss the British Legion's Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall. A statement from the palace said that following on from their recent advice that the Queen should rest for a few days, Her Majesty's doctors have advised that she should continue to rest for at least the next 2 weeks. The doctors have advised that Her Majesty can continue to undertake light desk-based duties during this time, including some virtual audiences, but not to undertake any official visits. Her Majesty regrets that this means she'll be unable to attend the Festival of Remembrance on Saturday, the 13th of November. They stressed it is still her firm intention to be at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday, where in recent years, Prince Charles has placed the nation's wreath on her behalf.
She lived through the Second World War. She saw her father lead the nation and she served herself. And for her, this is a prime duty of the monarch, She'll hate missing it, but she'll try to be ready for the Remembrance Sunday service.
This was the Queen's last public outing a week and a half ago. Since then, she spent a night in hospital after having preliminary tests, we don't know what for, and cancelled 2 major engagements, a trip to Northern Ireland and her appearance at the Climate Summit in Glasgow. I understand that the Queen has been well enough to record a message that will be played at COP26. And again, the palace have used that phrase, saying that she is in good spirits. They know that people will understandably be concerned about her. She is, after all, 95 years old. But they want to stress that doctors are being cautious, and she is still working away behind the scenes. This week, she's welcomed 2 new ambassadors to the UK.
I'm very glad to have the chance to see you, if only mechanically, this morning.
And presented her award for poetry. The Queen, no doubt, also wanting to send a subtle message of reassurance, as she's so often done during her reign. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Windsor Castle.
Now, Prince Andrew's lawyers in the United States have asked a judge to dismiss his accuser, Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit. Ms Giuffre has accused the Duke of York of sexually abusing her when she was 17, more than 20 years ago. In court filings, the Duke said he unequivocally denies sexually abusing or assaulting her. The first group of gay, bisexual and transgender Afghans that the UK government helped flee Afghanistan have arrived in Britain. The first group of 29 refugees includes students and activists who campaign for equal rights in Afghanistan. Many of them would have been in danger from the Taliban, who consider homosexuality a crime. Bristol is the first city in the UK to launch a programme dedicated to tackling the surge of drink spiking in nightclubs. Venues are going to be given testing kits to help detect harmful substances in beverages. It comes after more than 200 incidents were reported to police in the last 2 months.
We started the work back in May with the police to develop a response to drink spiking, and that developed, obviously, and speeded up to the position that we're in now, where we've been able to launch a coordinated campaign that focuses on education, telling people what they can do, and also focuses on the offender, about bringing those people who are committing the dreadful crime to justice.
Now, there have been more bitter words in the dispute with France over fishing rights. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, has accused the UK of breaking promises it made during Brexit talks. In an interview with the Financial Times, he said, "When you spend years negotiating a treaty and then a few months later you do the opposite of what was decided on the aspects that suit you the least, it's not a big sign of your credibility." Dan Whitehead reports from St Helier on the escalating row.
This could be the last catch of crab to make it out of Jersey. The Sarah P has been fishing the Guernsey waters for the last 8 days. Now the priority is to get it to Saint Malo and into the EU before France blocks ports and toughens checks.
It's very, very worrying, because if they do close the inspection post down in Saint Malo, we're completely stopped. We won't be able to buy any more fish, we won't be able to export until it's sorted out. We haven't got the option of shipping through the UK and going out through Holland or going direct to Spain. The logistics of it just don't work for us. It's just too far, too long a time, and it doesn't work.
This is Jersey's biggest crab and lobster exporter. If they're prevented from landing their catch in France, there's no point in Jersey's fishermen heading out to sea.
The majority of Jersey's catch is exported to the EU, so the closure of ports and extra checks isn't just an inconvenience, it could stop the industry overnight.
The row centres around licences, and there are still 55 French boats on Jersey's red list, meaning they'll have no right to fish here from Monday.
We have no hint whatsoever that the boats on the red list deserve a license in Jersey. No hint. We've never seen them, we've never boarded them, no Jersey fisherman has ever seen them. They have no paperwork, they have no data from their GPSs. We have zero hint that they've been in the area.
They're trying their luck.
They're trying their luck.
Tensions escalated after France seized a Scottish scallop trawler on Thursday and charged its captain. The crew were seen leaving the boat, surrounded by a legal team on Friday evening.
You're heading back to Britain tonight, do you think? No, not tonight. Definitely not. Does anyone put a date, time on it, or is that asking too much?
Your guess is as good as mine.
With France threatening to impose restrictions from Tuesday, there is little time to resolve the issue. And many of Jersey's fishermen are fed up with the political fighting.
Nobody's going to win. There will be no winners. There will only be losers.
But will the French get more licences?
Probably just because they're French.
The UK says it will respond if France carries out its threats. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson insists France remains one of the UK's best and oldest allies. But neither side is backing down as this diplomatic storm in the Channel continues. Dan Whitehead, Sky News, Jersey.
The former One Direction singer Zayn Malik has pleaded no contest to harassment charges after a dispute with the mother of his girlfriend. Let's talk to our reporter, Katie Barnfield. What do we know, Katie?
Well, indeed, the former One Direction star, the singer, has denied assaulting Yolanda Hadid, who is, of course, the grandmother of his child, who had accused him of shoving her into a dresser during a heated argument last month, which took place at the house in Pennsylvania that Zayn shares with his girlfriend, the supermodel Gigi Hadid, and their one-year-old daughter, Kai. Now, during this argument, he is alleged to have sworn at Yolanda and ordered her to stay away from his daughter, as well as that allegation, obviously, of physical violence, which he denies. And though he does deny the physical element of it, he has, as you say, chosen not to contest 4 counts of harassment relating to that incident. Now, both Zayn and Gigi have released separate statements via American media outlets. Zayn, one to TMZ, where he called the allegations false, and then a second statement on Twitter to his 31 million followers there, where he hinted that he and Gigi may have broken up, talking about co-parenting their daughter Kai. He said, "This was and still should be a private matter, but it seems for now there is divisiveness, and despite my efforts to restore us to a peaceful family environment that will allow me to co-parent my daughter in a manner which she deserves, this has been leaked to the press. I am hopeful, though, for healing for all involved with the harsh words shared, and more importantly, I remain vigilant to protect Kai and give her the privacy she deserves." Now, in Gigi's statement she released to E! News, she didn't directly comment on the allegations other than to ask for privacy and say she is solely focused on the best for Kai. And the one person we haven't heard from directly yet is Yolanda herself.
OK, Katie, thank you. Well, let's get more on COP26, and world leaders will begin arriving in Glasgow for the summit this weekend, with the Prime Minister warning they must act before it's too late. Well, let's head to Glasgow and talk to Ross Greer from the Scottish Green Party. Good morning to you. I mean, first and foremost, are you hopeful that we are going to get something significant out of COP26?
Morning. I'm hopeful that we're going to get something significant. I don't think we're going to get an agreement, a commitment to action on the scale that we need, on the scale that the science says is required. But I think we will get something significant enough that will basically buy us the time that we need. The 2 critical things that we need out of COP26 are a revised agreement on the country-by-country emission targets. In Paris in 2015, we set that legally binding global agreement to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. But the country-by-country targets we set would take us to global warming of about 3 degrees. So what we need is to revise those. They're called nationally determined contributions. And the second key objective that needs to come out of this is honouring the climate financing agreement we came to in 2009, whereby the world's richest countries, those that caused the crisis, committed to transfer $100 billion a year to the world's poorest countries by 2020 to help them adapt and mitigate against the devastating effects of the climate crisis. that target wasn't hit. We're not even close to hitting that target by 2020. So the two things that we need from COP are new country-by-country emission reduction targets and a commitment to actually deliver the money that the Global South needs to deal with the devastating consequences of climate breakdown that is already happening.
I mean, there's a lot of talk and a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister over what England is doing. I mean, and the UK as a whole from his perspective, but also on what Nicola Sturgeon is doing, what the Scottish Government's doing in all of this. And although clearly we are leaders in this and we are hosting this event, if China doesn't play ball, I mean, Xi Jinping not actually attending the summit, if President Biden can't get Congress on board for his ambitious plans, I mean, we're not going to get anywhere, are we?
No, not at all. I mean, obviously, we need major emitters like China, like the US, to be committing to significant action. But there are positive signs. So China, for example, has committed to net zero by 2060 and to significant reductions by 2030. Now, we really need them to go much further than that, but that's significant progress. They've also made specific commitments, for example, against the financing of coal outside of China. So the Chinese government is one of the major financiers of new coal developments across the world. It looks like they're going to end that. That's a really positive step. But here in the UK, we need to remember our historical responsibility here. The Industrial Revolution started in the UK. So basically, we've been emitting a lot more for a lot longer than pretty much anyone else on the planet. And what we emit into the atmosphere stays there. What we emitted a century ago is still there and is still a major part of what's causing this crisis. So we have a role here. We need to take a leadership role. We have a moral responsibility. And unfortunately, what we've seen from the UK government in the last week is the opposite of that. If the UK government was serious as the host of this summit, what could be the most significant summit in human history, they wouldn't have, in the last couple of days, made major budget announcements that included £20 billion on new roads and cuts to aviation taxes with a view to trying to increase the number of domestic flights in this country. That's not climate leadership. Climate leadership would be investing in public transport, investing in warmer homes. Those are the kind of steps that we're taking here in Scotland, but we really need to say leadership.
But to be fair, the head of Scottish tourism has welcomed that move on flights.
I would profoundly disagree with the Scottish Tourism Alliance on this. The last thing that we need is to increase domestic flights within the UK. What we should be doing is trying to make rail travel cheaper in the UK. It shouldn't be up to 5 times more expensive to take the train, say, between Glasgow and London than it is to fly. We should be reducing the cost of rail travel. We shouldn't be trying to go back to pre-pandemic levels of domestic flights or of international flights, because the climate reality is that we cannot do that and hit these targets for keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees. We're seeing flash flooding in Glasgow this week. That's about as prophetic as you can get for the host city of a climate summit just days before the world arrives. We are running out of time to take the steps that we actually need to save our planet. But these same steps are ones that would benefit all of us. So in Glasgow, half of households don't have access to a private car. Most of those households are not flying once a year, never mind on a regular basis. Cuts to aviation taxes don't help them. Making public transport cheaper, more affordable, more accessible. So for example, in Scotland, all young people are going to be able to take the bus for free from January next year, thanks to a budget agreement the Green Party and the Scottish Government came to. That's climate leadership, and it's climate leadership that actually helps lift families out of poverty. Those are the steps that we need to take, not giving tax cuts to already incredibly wealthy industries.
Now, in the run-up to the COP26 climate talks in Glasgow, countries have been encouraged to pledge bold plans to achieve net zero carbon emissions and cap global warming at 1.5 degrees. But some nations are still heavily reliant on polluting industries like coal and oil. Poland, for example, still gets 70% of its energy from coal, and 2 of the biggest coal plants, Turkov and Bełchatów, have been resisting calls to comply with EU emission standards. Until they cooperate, Brussels is fining the Polish government €500,000 a day. Stephen Murphy has been speaking to locals in Bogatynia, near the Turów plant.
Poland loves its coal. The fossil fuel generates around 3/4 of the country's electricity, and there's a large and powerful coal lobby. It's dirty, it's damaging, and it's divisive. As we'll see at COP26, richer nations want coal gone. Other countries think the transition is too fast. There's a lot of opposition here to the EU's Green Deal, which aims for climate neutrality by 2050. We went to one coal mine at Turów to see how the Poles are fighting to exploit their own resources. The Turów mine is the second largest open-cast coal mine in Poland. And to get a true sense of its scale, you really need to take to the air. It stretches for more than 2,500 football pitches, and the Polish government has now extended its licence to operate until 2044. The Polish are determined to use those extra years to take every bit of coal out of the ground here.
Gdyby tylko oprzeć się na węglu brunatnym, Polska mogłaby funkcjonować bez energii odnawialnej jeszcze przez jakieś 150 lat. Proszę pana, podstawową sprawą jest to, co wylatuje z komina, a nie to, co się wrzuca do oczywiście pieca. Więc proszę pana, jeżeli spełnia się normatywy, a elektrownia Turów i elektrownia Bełchatów spełniają wytyczne konkluzji batowskich w kontekście emisji różnych substancji.
It's not just about feeding the power station here that produces 7% of Poland's electricity. It's also about the thousands of jobs the mine supports. In the nearby town of Bogatynia, people shudder to think of a future without coal money.
Najprawdopodobniej tak, bo tutaj by straciło przykładowo pracowników w kopalni tam 3000 czy 4000 jest, nie powiem dokładnie, w elektrowni 2000.
As Turov's reserves are exploited, the mine will creep closer and closer to the Czech border. In the Czech village of Uhelna, residents claim the encroaching mine is draining their water.
But the crucial area for us is here, and this will be mined in 5 years.
Milan Staric says the water issue started around the same time the mine first expanded towards the border.
So this is the well.
This is the old well.
Or what used to be the well.
It is still a well, but it's completely empty right now.
Pressure from these residents led to the Czech government taking Poland to the European Court of Justice. The court ordered the mine to shut down. The Poles refused. They're now being fined €500,000 a day by the court, but say the fines won't be paid. Moving away from fossil fuels is painful, and in Turov's case, can drive a wedge between nations.
Now, an education charity says only 3 out of every 10 people starting teacher training this year are men. Research from UCAS reveals that men are also more likely to leave the profession after they've qualified. Laura Bundock reports on the gender imbalance in schools.
A wholly semantic field of purity and hope. Great answer.
Mr. Hodges is a class act in the classroom, but as a man, he's in the minority.
Coming over into teaching was a bit of a culture shock because it's about 75%, female.
Why do you think there aren't more male teachers?
I would say kind of the stigma of the profession as well, especially going into primary school, that idea of stereotypical and outdated concepts of being a female profession.
This year, only 3 in 10 starting teacher training are men. But Speak to Students and most boys relate more to male teachers.
Whenever there's situations or problems, they imagine themselves in our positions and they're able to understand where I'm coming from.
Male teachers have a more relaxed approach to teaching, which I think suits me better, so I think I can learn more with a male teacher.
I feel like a better mix would be better because other boys would be more inclined to choose teaching as an option as well, if they like to, because they see them as role models.
10B, here's what's happening today.
Recruitment and retention is hard, especially for male teachers.
Half the teachers in this school are men, but that's unusual. The average secondary school has just 37%, and in primary schools, only 15% of teachers are male.
But does it matter? Oasis Academy Coulsdon has above average numbers of children from poorer homes. The principal says they often need positive male role models.
I think for students to feel like school is for them, they've got to feel like they belong. And part of belonging is seeing yourself reflected in the school community that you're part of. So I think for some of our working class white British boys, it's really important that they can see people who are not too dissimilar for them, so they can see that as an opportunity.
An opportunity some say could help stop boys underperforming at school.
I feel like there's a lot of kind of positive momentum
that can come from making sure that boys don't fall behind in education. And I feel instinctively that having more male teachers would contribute positively to that. It seems to me that seeing gender equality in, the first workplace that young people really observe must be a good thing for gender equality later in life.
Macbeth becomes malevolent.
And that's why more men in classrooms might make a difference, helping pupils perform and achieve their potential. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Coulston in Surrey.
Now, he's the American football star who created a movement when he refused to stand for the national anthem in defiance of racial injustice. Colin in Black and White, which is out now on Netflix, details the early life of Colin Kaepernick through the creative vision of director Ava DuVernay. Our entertainment reporter Claire Gregory reports.
When American footballer Colin Kaepernick refused to stand for the US national anthem in a pre-season game back in 2016, his protest against racial injustice inspired one of the most globally recognisable cultural movements of the century.
When I woke up that morning, I told myself I was going to put on a show.
Now, acclaimed director Ava DuVernay gives us the boy behind the man.
He came to me with the idea of, hey, could I do something with my childhood? And so for me, it wasn't, it was an opportunity to say, okay, we can do this if we can use it as a springboard to talk about much more. It's the kid on his way to being the hero, right? And it basically says that we can all be the heroes of our own lives as long as we really pay attention to each step, because every step matters.
The first time around this many black people.
His adoption and nuances of growing up with white parents would make Colin perhaps particularly culturally aware.
My daughter is black, and it's an enormous responsibility. Sometimes I say the wrong thing, and my son steps in, and my son's white, but it's her brother, and he is like, no, Mom, that's actually not right. It's humbling, because I also have to be the mother. But at the same time, I have to admit repeatedly, sometimes I don't know what I'm doing in certain areas.
What's up with Kaepernick?
Rather than focusing on the taking of the knee, this examines how the upbringing of young people can impact on society.
I've been working with kids a lot, and so this work here, brought me closer to just an empathy for young people, and the fact that so often they're told that they're not important, but those moments when you're a teenager are the most important. And so this is certainly the case with Colin.
My passion, my love, was being a quarterback.
While there may be some moments from our childhood that we'd rather forget, the message of this is to pay attention to young people, to shape not just their future, but potentially an entire movement. Claire Gregory, Sky News.
Let's have a look at the weather for you today, and it remains unsettled this weekend, yet more wet and windy spells, so there could be a bit more flooding. Overnight rain and gusty winds mean a wet start for much of western Britain. It should be drier either side of that band, with coastal showers for Western Ireland. Now, heavy rain and strong winds will push north and east into the North Sea, leaving a cooler feeling day with sunny spells and showers. Those showers most frequent in the west with a risk of thunder. The rain heavy and slow moving over parts of Scotland, but should clear into the evening. Well, it's time to take through the papers this morning with the journalists Afia Adam and Thomas Copeland. Good to see you both this morning. Thomas, we'll start with the eye, should we? And the Prime Minister saying COP26 is the last chance to save the planet.
That's right. It's a wide-ranging interview with Boris Johnson in The Eye from The Eye's political editor, Hugo Guy. He talks about all sorts of things. He talks about COVID, the economy, booster jobs, supply chains. But it's on COP that I think that we get to the heart of the issue, and most of the interview spent talking about that. Johnson seems to be on expectation management mode in the article anyway. He talks repeatedly about how difficult this is going to be, incredibly difficult, he says, to get a deal with the countries around the world attending COP, but also simultaneously raising raising the stakes, talking about just how significant this issue is. That's where the front page headline comes from, Last Chance to Save the Planet. Perhaps in the hope that some of those countries who haven't quite yet got on board, the likes of China, the likes of India, it might be at COP that they or their representatives manage to get some sort of deal across the line. The two sort of things jump out. One, he blasts what could be considered long-term climate commitments, things like 2050, 2060. He talks in the article about how the political leaders making those commitments will be, as he put it, pushing up the daisies by the time they ever have to be delivered. And actually, quite often it appears to be a strategy in order to delay action rather than to set any sort of long-term ambitious targets. Perhaps that tells us something. Perhaps that tells us that at COP we're likely to see some commitments for the late 2020s, early 2030s, as opposed to 40s, 50s, 60s. One of the other interesting things he talks about is accountability. He says that voters are changing. And even in countries like Russia, which is relatively undemocratic, voters are going green. There's a great quote in it. There's something more powerful than the government, he says, more powerful than corporations, and that's the market. The market is going green. He says, my political supporters are going green. So clearly Boris Johnson sees, tackling climate change head on as not only a moral issue that he needs to address, but also an electoral one as well. It's that kind of philosophy that, the voters will hold us to account. It's embedded in, conservatism and liberalism, that the market will decide. I wonder, though, when you've got such an ambitious project like trying to get climate change, trying to mitigate against the effects of climate change, is it enough just to rely on voters all the time? Voters are capricious, they're busy, they're preoccupied with their lives. Courts and oversight bodies are not. Unless there's some sort of system to try to make sure that every country is adhering to their responsibilities and their commitments, is it not the case that some could start to freeload on the work of others? I don't know, but clearly at the end of COP, we'll start to see if that's a philosophy that Boris Johnson wants to see through to the end.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. Afia, what's the Times saying about Bowie?
Yeah, so this is a story, like you said, from the Times, and the headline is "Ching Ching, $200 million bid for Bowie's songs." So, of course, we know David Bowie, a huge hit maker, and his state of the song, so that's his back catalogue, are attracting bids of £200 million. Now, the deal would basically involve him selling off the rights to things like Space Oddity, his 1970s albums, and basically like a huge deal for whoever has the money who wants to buy these songs. So that would be the publishing and the recording rights for these David Bowie tracks. And this is something, the artists do, they often sell off their back catalogues. Lauryn Hill has done it, Michael Jackson has done it in the past as well. But $200 million is a pretty high bid for such a huge and synonymous back catalogue when it comes to David Bowie songs. Now, we don't know when it will go on sale and who is bidding at the moment, but if you've got $200 million, you can have them all.
I wonder who owns them at the moment. It'd be interesting to know who actually owns them.
I think at the moment it's his estate that own them.
Right. Yeah, oh well, I mean, you can understand why people would do it. To the Telegraph, Thomas, rail commuting. I have to say, I don't get on a train very often, but when I do, they are extremely quiet at the moment.
Well, that's backed up by the figures, Stephen, because the Rail Delivery Group is saying that rail commuting to work is only come up to around 45% of its pre-pandemic levels. Weekend journeys, they're back to 90%. Now, what that seems to tell us is that it's fairly clear there's been a big shift in working patterns that's happened over the course of pandemic. It looks like we're not just going back to pre-pandemic life, the sort of rail commuting life, or indeed bus commuting of any kind, jumping on the bus at 7, 8 in the morning into the office for 9, jumping on again at 5 in the evening. It looks like we're not going back to that. That's what these figures seem to suggest anyway. Now, that's could be good news and could be bad news. The good news is that more working from home, flexible working, could be really good for productivity. Productivity is the really big problem, one of the really big problems in the UK economy, where we're tied last in the G7 in terms of productivity. We're 17th in the G20 in terms of productivity. So if working from home, that means more comfortable where you're working, less time spent sitting on a train or a bus, greater flexibility at home. Maybe it's care costs, maybe it's caring responsibilities. If all of those things lead to greater productivity. That's good news for the economy. The bad news, I suppose, is that the UK, as a proportion of GDP, the UK economy is quite reliant on kind of hospitality, stuff like cafes, the lunch places where you get your coffees and your food at lunchtime. And so if there are fewer people in city centres where offices would typically be, purchasing and feeding money into the economy that way, that's not good news either. And it's not good news, I suppose, for rail companies as well. I mean, part of that article is the Rail Delivery Group in some ways appealing to people, get back onto the trains, they seem to be saying. So, you know, it's good news and bad news. My feeling is that the productivity will edge it. That's better for the UK economy, but only if, I suppose, we can come to a position where people are at the weekends jumping on the train or going into the town centres and injecting money into the economy that way as well. So it remains to be seen, long way to go, but potentially some good news for productivity.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how what the long-term effects of the pandemic are going to be in terms of how we change as a country and as an economy. Now, let's have a look at the FT, Afia, because there's always this argument, isn't there? You know, are you an Apple or are you a Microsoft sort of person? Microsoft winning the deal at the minute.
Yes, they are. Now, I'm usually an Apple type of person, but like so many other people, I have been forced to use Microsoft Teams over the past 2 years. And that has helped them get to some record profits. So their profits are up 5.5% yesterday, making them the biggest company, the biggest tech company listed. They've overtaken Apple at the moment. And that, of course, their growth is because of the use of Microsoft products over the pandemic, and probably Microsoft Teams and all the rest of the things that enabled us to work virtually, remotely, and digitally. And so Apple also have fallen foul to the market at the moment. They are down about 4% at the moment. Slow sales of the new iPhones, the new iPads, the new Apple products, and shortages when they're trying to get chips have also hurt iPhone as well. And this is a week where you saw Tesla, on the market, you know, another $1 trillion company, as they were declared earlier on.
Good to see you both.
So some huge figures there.